if you just want to introduce yourself and kind of let the people know who you are and what you're about.
All right, so my name is Coach Chris. At least that's what everybody calls me. That's what I forced them to call me. I've been in this field for going on 9 years now. I started my own company in 2020. The name of the company is CFP, so Cole Fitness and Performance. Kept it really simple. And I've been working with athletes specifically for going on 5 years. I've worked with athletes, ranging from badminton to soccer to hockey, football. I had a fencer at one point. It was a short period of time, but still had some exposure to that type of sport. And yeah, but I primarily work with a lot of hockey players. No position specific, but just the general hockey athlete. So regardless of what they're playing on the ice. And I work with a lot of soccer players and specifically goalkeepers. So it's a world that I didn't really know much about until maybe 3 years ago, and it's a world that I realized hadn't gotten a lot of attention. And what I learned from it is there are so many things that they can benefit from that they're not getting, currently with what it is they do for training. Same thing for soccer athletes and hockey. There's a lot of hype with certain things, and I feel like the misinformation and the lack of education that field had when it came to performance and all that stuff, it was missing, and somebody had to fill the gap, especially in Montreal, because those two sports are really, really popular. So I kind of took on a niche there, and I'm just trying to build up my reputation, some credibility with this field, and with sports of all kinds, but especially in that soccer hockey world. And on the flip side of that coin, I work with a lot of average, Joes and Janes, and the fitness adult and the fitness enthusiast, and essentially just trying to make them move better, feel better. And I train them like athletes, because at the end of the day, most of the goals that they have are athletic in nature. So I try to get across the message that training like an athlete doesn't mean that you have to be an athlete, but being athletic requires certain skills and certain abilities, and those abilities will help you get to your goals, which in that world usually is aesthetics, health, or fat loss. But almost all my athletes usually have that as part of their goals. So that's a little bit about Coach Chris.
That's awesome. That's pretty cool too, because I'm a goalkeeper.
Oh yeah, what up?
It's pretty cool to see that, because I agree with you. It's definitely, there's a lot of stuff that isn't, I feel like, talked about as much that it needs to be talked about. So that's pretty sweet. So so just to start off, through like your time of being a trainer and working with so many diverse different people, what would you say, specifically speaking of footballers, soccer players, what are the three biggest mistakes that you see them making in the gym when they're trying to focus on getting progress?
That's a solid question, man. If I had to give you three of the most common ones that I deal with footballers, regardless of the position, I would say one, filling the wrong buckets. I'll kind of dive into some more details on all those three. Two would be suboptimal loading. And the last one would be just going through the motions with their training. So regarding filling the wrong buckets, a lot of athletes, especially nowadays, especially in soccer, is there's so much time spent on the pitch, and the pitch can only provide you with certain stimulus. So, when it comes to like figuring out what those stimulus are, we use what's called the force velocity curve. And essentially, without getting too complicated, is there are two opposite ends to that curve. At the top, it's max strength. So think powerlifter. And then on the other end, so towards the right, you have max velocity. So think max speed sprinting. So when you're training on the pitches, you're really favoring one side of that curve. And the problem is that the other parts of the curve itself will contribute to, all points. And there are traditionally 5 points that are spoken about. You have max strength, you have strength speed, which essentially is taking, moderate loads, moving them relatively fast. You have power that's in the middle, which is usually involving some kind of load. You have speed strength, which is like light loaded stuff. So think like jumps, maybe like add some small weights to the jumps as well. And then the max speed stuff is like straight up sprinting. And when you're doing stuff on the pitches, you're not really, there's not enough load, at least until a certain point. Like when you're a young kid and sprinting, it's definitely going to do something for you. But as you get older, unless you have some more force going into the ground and all that kind of stuff, it's really not going to do as much for you. And if you were to add some other things like some strength training, is you would be filling buckets that would definitely transfer to your sport. It may not be sport specific, but in the gym, we're not trying to train sport specific stuff. That's what the pitch is for. But there are things that you cannot get from the pitch in terms of like filling a bucket or a quality that you can only get in the gym, or at least with some sort of external resistance. So definitely not filling the right buckets, or at least not being aware of the fact that other buckets will contribute to better athletic performance and better transfer to your actual sport, is something that I see lacking a lot in the football community, soccer for all my Canadian homies out there, including myself. Number two would be the suboptimal loading. So with the athletes that I do work with, a lot of the times when I ask them what they have done in the gym, if they had ever been in the gym to begin with, the rep scheme that they would use would be very high on the rep range, which isn't the worst thing in the world. It definitely has its place. But the issue is that's stimulating something that they don't necessarily want to achieve themselves. So when they come in, everybody wants to be more powerful. Everybody wants to be stronger, more explosive. When you're doing sets of 15, there's a really small chance that you're doing those at the same intent or with the same intent that like a 1 rep max jump or let's say a dive for a goalkeeper requires. So that's a max effort type of movement. Well, if you're doing reps of 15, is the intent similar? I would say no. So let's say you're doing a 1 rep max jump. That's going to have more carryover because of the type of activity that is. And, you can compare it to a dive. Those are very similar in nature. So at some point, when you add a little bit of weight to that, is you're going to be applying more force into the ground. It also requires some sort of time restraint. So when you're playing a sport, you have only a certain amount of time to produce force. So this is where the weight room has its limitations, is when you add more weight, you slow yourself down to a certain degree unless you get stronger. But at some point, you're going to have to make sure you remove some of the loading and actually do stuff unloaded so that you can mimic the speeds of contraction. But a lot of the kids will use too light of weight for too high of reps, and they're not training the quality that they're trying to develop to make them better in their given sport or at their given position. So for goalkeepers, it's being able to jump higher. Well, last time I checked, you usually get one attempt to jump really high for like a cross or something like that. If you're doing 15 jumps in a row and the first 2 are like, decent quality and the other 13 are, they're not as high as they should be, well, then you're just practicing jumping lower than you are trying to jump higher. So the ratios don't work out. So adding some light loads and keeping the rep ranges low will allow you to express that force and that power that you're trying to develop. And at some point, you can either add more weight, or you can, vary the jumps. So you can add, pauses. You can take away pauses. You can add repeat jumps. You can add, different angles to your jump. But essentially, the suboptimal loading is the weights are too light, the reps are too high, and they're getting more of a cardiovascular stimulus and more of a pump. I think that's a better way of terming it. Is they're chasing a pump. And when you're jumping, for a ball, you're not feeling, there's no quad act. You don't feel like, oh, my quads are working, my glutes are working. No, it's too fast. That's not the kind of action that's not the response you're going to get from that kind of action. So they're chasing the wrong thing, and the loading, the poor loading choice is essentially how that's being manifested. So that would be the second one. And to wrap up, the third one is just the going through the motions. A lot of times when we do speed work with our athletes and we have them warm up, we'll kind of introduce some new movements, and some of them they've recognized. And then when they do them, I'm like, the hell is that? I'm like, oh, that's how we were taught. I'm like, you're not even doing it right. I was like, you're just doing whatever. It's almost like you're trying to hold a conversation with somebody as you're trying to learn a new move. I'm like, it doesn't work. So the one exercise that's butchered is karaoke, or karaoke for all the crazy fools out there. I think it's called karaoke. Karaoke singing. But I was watching, I'm like, that's not how you karaoke. I'm like, how is that supposed to transfer to actual movement in sport? And we were going through some demonstrations. I'm like, I want you to take that karaoke and now try and do the movement that would resemble what you're trying to practice. And it just didn't work. It was complicated. It just looked awkward. And then we adjusted it, and boom, everything changed. They saw the transfer. They saw how it related to what, a specific movement they may go through on the pitch, how it came back to a good karaoke. And a lot of the kids just go through motions. They don't really think about what they're doing. They don't analyze what they're doing and how, effective it is at transfer, or how much it transfers at all. So the same mentality that they have for like warm-ups, I see it transferred into the gym, where it's just like, I'm just going to go through it and not really pay attention to what I'm doing. And that's not always their fault. Sometimes they're taught that way, so they kind of get it programmed into them. But at the same time, is appreciating what you're doing and trying to understand that you need to learn from, these movements, and understand you gotta, actually put some effort into what you're doing. And it doesn't always involve like having your heart rate super high and being sweaty, but putting some mental effort and mental energy into your training, into your movements, is really important, because you'll actually learn, what it is that, a good rep looks like. And then you'll be able to groove a pattern. And then at some point, as that pattern becomes automatic, and if it's automatic and you're not thinking about it, and when you're in the net, that's the last thing you want to do, is think about what you're doing. You just have to react. So just going through the motions is not helpful, especially when you're trying to learn something new. So we really try our best to be as detailed as possible, but not overcoach. Something that I struggle with is giving the right cues and letting the athlete figure it out. And the best thing that I've learned up to this point is let them mess up, and then give them an alternative and say, listen, which one felt better? And then normally 9 times out of 10 is they choose the one that actually is correct, because it feels better, it's smoother. So that's another way to coach it. And at that point, they then respect and appreciate taking the time to pay attention to what you're doing. And in that way, you can master a new skill and then apply it into your sport.
That's awesome. I even just from listening to you, I learned a lot of stuff, which is pretty cool to hear. And so one thing that I learned the hard way was the difference between like training smart and then training hard. And so that was a really big understanding. When I was younger, I used to train hard, and as I've gotten older, I feel like I'm training, I'm more smart now, and I'm not like I used to do crazy things, especially for soccer. I would run like 5 miles, 6 miles, and really that doesn't translate to the game, and in terms of being a goalkeeper and all that stuff. So one of my next things that I'm interested in like seeing your perspective on is, what would you say the difference between training to get stronger and the training to get more explosive? What would be some differences in that? Because that took me a while to figure out. And I think that's important for people that listen to this podcast, especially goalkeepers, to know.
Okay. That's a solid question. The one thing that we have to understand when it comes to power and explosive training, or, the kind of interchangeable terms, is power is derived from strength. So if you have a really small engine, your power potential is also really small. This is why a lot of athletes who don't spend time in the gym, or it doesn't have to be in the gym, just don't have any sort of external resistance, or they don't use any of it, you're really limiting your ability to get more powerful, because you need to have a base level of strength in order to express power. Because essentially all it is you're starting to add velocity to the force equation. So mass times acceleration is your force, but you have to have the velocity and the force, which goes into the whole power equation, because power involves time. So when you're playing a sport or anything, is let's look at a weightlifter, for example. So someone who's in the Olympics and who are doing Olympic lifts, they have, I don't want to say all day, but they have more time during each rep to kind of accomplish or to complete the rep itself. But they have to be able to express high levels of power to do that. Well, they have to have a decent level of strength to be able to express power to begin with, especially at those loads. But at the same time, you got an athlete who wants to jump higher, but their strength level is super, the strength threshold is really low. Their ability to express power, which again involves time, is going to be limited. So this is where you see some guys who, let's say, a good example would be a standing vertical jump and then a 2-foot approach jump. The vertical jump requires or allows you to spend more time on the ground. But when you do an approach jump, you spend almost more than half the time less on the ground, which means that you have to be able to produce higher peak forces in that given time. You don't have the ability to tap into your max strength because you need time to do that. So when it comes to power development, is you have to have strength. And then when it comes to power training, you have to recognize that there is a time restraint in a lot of the movements that you're doing. So you have to keep that in mind when you're actually selecting exercises. So getting really good at like, loaded squat jumps is fantastic, but because of the weight is you're not able to express or complete that movement as fast as, let's say you were comparing that to a standing vertical. So at some point you got to practice the standing vertical too. But if you don't have a base of strength, it's really not helpful. Like you can look at it in terms of a glass of water. That's how it was explained to me. So let's say you have a glass of water. The water is your strength base, and the amount of water inside is the power. You have a small cup, you can only get so much water in that cup. You have a big cup, you have a lot more potential to fill that cup up with water. So a lot of the athletes who spend all day on the pitch have very small cups. So therefore, as though they may, like you may have a kid who's really powerful, but because his strength levels are so low, he is not as powerful as he could be. But if you have somebody who's got a really big cup, the potential for power is a lot higher. But at the same time, I'll give you an example for hockey. I had a kid who's he's 165 pounds, and he can deadlift 500 plus for, I would say 2 or 3. It doesn't make any sense. His strength to body weight ratio is just insane. But that's a good example of him having a really, really big engine or, a massive cup. But the issue with his sport is that he doesn't have 4 seconds to complete a stride. He has to do that in less time. So training him to get stronger makes absolutely no sense because he's already stupid strong. We want to make sure that this kid has as much water or as much of that cup filled up as possible, essentially equating to his ability to tap in to that strength in minimal time. So when you want to train for explosive strength, you have to A, have a base of strength to begin with. And then B, once you have a decent level of relative strength, is you have to keep in mind the time constraints that are involved in power training. So if you're spending a lot of time completing a rep, it's not power. There has to be some form of speed. There has to be load for it to be powerful. So resistance, so it can be your body weight if you're really weak. If you're stronger, body weight is not going to be heavy enough. But you also have to make sure that you're completing the rep in as minimal time as possible, as fast as you can with max intent. And then once when we know what the sport is, then at some point we specify by unloading them because they're not going to be, holding onto dumbbells on the pitch or on the ice, and then having them do those activities with body weight only, where it's a lot faster, or it should be a lot faster. So that's kind of the biggest difference.
That's very, very interesting. Very interesting. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of good stuff out of this. That's cool.
I apologize for ranting.
No, seriously, that's fine, because I've heard it explained in so many different ways, so it's always cool to hear it from that perspective. And that was cool. And then, like I said, I'm learning stuff as we go as well, so it's always really interesting. So another question that I have that has kind of always been interesting to me, and as an athlete, I've had to improve on this and understand this better, but especially through your eyes as a trainer, how important is sleep, rest, and recovery? Because I think, now we kind of live in a world where I feel like hard work is sold a lot, and we always forget the importance of recovery, and that you need to actually like relax for yourself.
No pain, no gain, right?
Exactly.
The only way.
So if you could expand on that, your kind of ideas and stuff behind that.
Most definitely. Well, first of all, I don't ascribe to the no pain, no gain mentality. I was taught that, probably like yourself, when I was, coming up in sports. I guess a quick background is I played football, so American football and basketball for the majority of my adolescence. I started football when I was 7 or 6, and I went all the way up until I was 19. I ended up playing football more. I had to decide. Basketball helped a lot. So multi-sport athlete definitely made me a better football player in many ways. But in both sports, it was always the, if you're not sweating, if you're not on the ground throwing up and all that kind of stuff, if you're not sore, then it wasn't a good workout or it wasn't a good, practice, which at the time kind of made sense because I was like, hey, well, I have to be used to pain and I got to get used to suffering and mental strength and all that stuff. So, I guess you can argue that there's some mental fortitude building in those kind of environments, but is that the only way you can build like mental toughness? I would say absolutely not, especially, what I've learned now and a lot of smart coaches that have been, able to coach me. And when it comes to like the recovery part, is essentially is the no pain, no gain. Well, if you're in pain, you can't keep making progress because you're limited by the pain itself. The pain is a sign something's wrong. So to push past it, if something's, I'm sure you've heard of this before. This saying is, or you've been asked this question. I had a coach, or even the athletic therapist on the team was like, "Listen, are you hurt? Or are you injured?" So if I'm like, I got cut, okay, I got hurt. But if my leg is broken, I'm injured. So you got to be able to differentiate between the two. Being hurt, definitely there's some like mental strength that's needed there. It's like, listen, at some point, it's like I got to be able to push past this. Being uncomfortable is okay, and that's part of sport, especially in like those crunch time moments. But being injured is not something that you want to push past because you make it work. Make it worse. Sorry. And a lot of professional athletes have unfortunately felt coerced to do more than they should have because of contracts and stuff like that. And you have people in the NFL who are suing the NFL because of the pressure that they felt after injuring themselves, and then their contracts aren't guaranteed, and then they're taking drugs on the sideline, and then after like 5 years of playing, they retire, and then all the consequences from those drugs, catch up to them, and it's like, oh, why did I do that? So the no pain, no gain attitude really does. It can lead to some serious like negative effects with athletes, both physically and psychologically. But when it comes to sleep and recoveries, you don't recover, you don't make progress. It's that simple. You don't make your gains in the gym. The gains come during the recovery process. That's why, like, or I would say go and sprint 7 days a week, full speed, and do it for like 30 minutes. And then come back, on the 8th day, so the Monday, and then see if your sprint times got better. Guarantee they didn't get better. Because if you haven't recovered from the first, second, third session, you're not going to make progress. You have to understand as your body goes through these phases during adaptation. So you have an alarm phase where the body's like, the hell's going on here? It's a lot of stress. I got to kind of adjust. At some point, the amount of recovery compared to the stress in the system, it's going to end up going down where you don't recover as well. That's usually where we back off. And then you experience what's called supercompensation, or ideally supercompensation, where you then come back better once the recovery period is over, because your body is now used to that stimulus, that stress, and it can respond to the stress better. And we just continue to do that, and that's how the process, continues along for however long we're training. But the ability to recover and to manage stress, it really comes down to your ability to sleep right, your ability to train and program correctly and intelligently, given your lifestyle and the stresses in your life, and your ability to put good food in your body, because nutrition plays a huge role in recovery. How you feel, how you function mentally, your ability to recover, your ability to train hard, because if you're hungry or you're not eating properly, your training is going to be affected by that. But definitely sleep, man, especially with nowadays is school and all these added things, and sports are year round now, so athletes don't get a break. And the amount of stress that the parents, unfortunately, sometimes they put on the kids and the coaches as well, is especially because now a lot of coaches are volunteer coaches. They mean well, their hearts are in the right place, but if you don't understand physiology, mechanics, and how the body deals with these things, then you could be adding more to someone's plate, which is probably why they're not getting better. And then yelling at them and having them run sprints, or your teams run sprints because you lost, is not going to get your team better. It doesn't work. If anything, it gets them to associate like sprints with punishment. So then when they have to go and sprint for real, they don't want to.
Yeah.
There's like a psychological component to that too. But yeah, you laugh, you smile. I was like, you had to go through that yourself.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of the one of the things that really changed my mindset when I was young is I used to have a coach that would only let the winning team do extra work. So like sprints and that kind of stuff. And it's just funny you said that, because I've had coaches as well that used to, if we lost a game or bad practice, they'd threaten to make us run. So it was interesting that you said that and kind of made that comment.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. And it's a really poor way of building rapport and a good relationship with your athletes, because they just see you as a dictator. And there's something to be said for, being, an authoritative figure. Like your athletes have to respect you.
Yeah.
But if they can understand that you're human and that you have like their best interest at heart, they'll respect you, and if you can explain to them why they're doing what they're doing and build some trust and show them that this way is going to help them, or at least you believe it will, they'll respect you more, they'll take you more seriously, and they'll listen to you better, and they won't question you as much. And that's something that I try to do as often as possible, is to try to build a strong relationship from the get-go with my athletes, and to have them, trust me as much as possible, because in that way we can actually get some work done, and then not question me, throughout the way. And I'm open to questions, because at the end of the day, just tell me they're listening, paying attention. So if I can't answer it, then that's my job to go figure out, hey, maybe this is something I'm not aware of. I appreciate the question. I'll get back to you on that. Or here's a reference to this question you have, and go look it up, and I'll learn it at the same time, to show them that I don't know everything. But at the same time, as I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to take, criticism and advice from my athletes as well, because they teach me a lot. I learn more from them than they learn from me, probably. So,
well, that's awesome. That's awesome. So one of the last questions here, because I know that you have a busy day and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but
I appreciate that. Thank you, man.
what would you say, what would be the best advice that you're giving? This is probably more aimed towards college athletes. How would you say, how would you tell them to help them maintain their energy? Because through training, classes, so on and so forth, just having a social life, especially like from my point of view, like I'll notice like my energy dips, and I know, sleep, diet, and caffeine has a role in that. But what advice would you have for athletes looking to have a very steady kind of energy level, or making sure that it's consistent?
I guess you can come at this from various aspects. Just so I don't like give you a long hauled answer, I'll give you one tip from, let's say, a training perspective, a nutritional perspective, and then a lifestyle, perspective. So from training is minimal or minimum effective dosage. Just do the bare minimum that allows you to continue to progress, and leave it at that. Doing more does not necessarily mean you're going to do better, or that you're going to get better results, especially when you consider that you have already a lot on your plate, or at least I'm assuming that you have to be able to balance what's on your plate. So sometimes athletes come in with unrealistic goals, given where they are in their lives at that present time. So we have some athletes sometimes that come in during season and are like, I want to get jacked, I want to get faster, all this stuff. And I asked them, how many times are you on the pitch, on the ice? 5 days a week. How many games? 2. School. Oh, it's busy. I got homework. I got exams. I'm like, and you want to get jacked? I said, that takes like 4 or 5 days a week of training. Those kind of training days are hard on the body, so they require recovery time. And if you're stressed out with school, you're stressed out with training, like, where are you going to find that time to recover? So sometimes being more realistic with your goals is really important. And that means doing just enough to allow you to move forward. So once you have a realistic goal laid out, then make sure your training does not conflict with everything that you're doing, and that you're doing the bare minimum to continue to make progress. And even then, sometimes you won't make as much progress as you'd like, but that's the sacrifice you have to make given what you have already on your plate, unless you remove something else and then replace that extra time with more training. But that sometimes isn't an option for athletes. So other things take priority, and sometimes training has to take a back seat. We try to, or at least promote not totally putting training aside, maybe doing a little bit less, because doing something is better than nothing. But at the same time, is we need to be very clear with what a realistic goal is, given the time that they have available to them to achieve those goals. So that would be from a training point of view. For nutrition, is guys, make sure that you're, or at least attempt to avoid skipping meals. So a lot of college athletes or college individuals, they have like these periods where they don't eat because of school and because of whatever. And then when they have an opportunity to eat, they don't necessarily choose the best foods. And I don't blame them for it. A lot of times it's what's convenient, which makes sense. But at the same time, is if you have, at least if you're able to get some consistency in terms of like an eating schedule, it'll help keep energy levels balanced. It'll help avoid, you wanting to go and binge. If you have, a sense of fullness, then you're less likely to choose foods, or at least too much of a certain food. So a lot of times those bad foods are cravings. It's usually because you're starving. But when you have a decent meal or a good snack throughout the days, you're less inclined to want to eat those things because, well, you already have some food in your stomach already. So there isn't that desire to go and pig out because, well, you've had a regular meal. And normally when people eat well, they have this, it's like a psychological effect where they want to continue to eat well. Yeah, but when you don't eat all day, it's like, well, screw it. I didn't have food all day. I have to make up for my calories. So I can do that by going to McDonald's or whatever. But when you eat well, and this is also why when you train well, it's like a chain of reaction where you want to continue, training well is, emphasizes being healthy, being fit. And it also requires you to, train or eat properly if you want to keep feeling that way. Well, then you're going to have to take the necessary measurements to find a way to eat well. So plan some food, plan some snacks, make better choices when it comes to, going to restaurants if ever you have to. So just making sure that you try to eat consistently and then eating good foods so that way you don't feel as crappy throughout the day. And then you have some like steady energy levels throughout the day as well. So you can do your things, to the best of your ability, and then you don't crash and start doing some nonsense. So that's that. And then to wrap up the lifestyle one is, it's okay to take a break. And that means from sport too. I know sport coaches probably going to hate that I'm saying that, but it's the truth, man. Unless you're even professional athletes have time off. Their jobs essentially are to play their sport. So they don't have school. Their work is the sport. So, when you compare it to a professional athlete, when you going to school and having different responsibilities as a young, college athlete is not the same thing as being a pro. Yes, there's pressure, but it's different. So if you want to maintain your school, your marks, you want to make sure you're still training, you want to make sure you don't crash, then you have to be okay with taking breaks from certain things, especially if those things are contributing to you having a lack of energy. So we do deload weeks, or we do weeks where we don't focus on like heavy lifts. We train to maintain, which is actually really easy to do in comparison to trying to train to make progress. Unless you're a beginner, you can just look at weight and you get better. So that's the beauty of being a beginner. But during the year, we at least try to maintain qualities that we built in the off season. And so that doesn't conflict with the lifestyle that the athletes have to live. And we tell them sometimes, hey, coach, or I have an athlete text me saying, I have exams this week. We're not training. It's okay. Like, you're not going to die.
Yeah.
You may feel like you're going to die, but that's just in your head. That's subjective. But you take the week off, man. Your studies are first. So have your priorities laid out, and stick to them. But it's okay to adjust them. But yeah, take breaks, man. Sometimes that extra practice or that extra workout during that week is not going to do you any good. So yeah,
That's
learning
awesome.
how to back off a little bit.
That's awesome. And that's something I've noticed as well. So I'm currently transitioning into like the professional world of football, soccer. I'm on trial right now.
Congrats, man.
Thank you. And I've noticed the different pressures between being like, oh, this is for my college and this is for my livelihood. And then you're competing against men that have families. And that's, so it's definitely awesome to like be able to realize that, especially when you're in college, take advantage of that break, take advantage of that time.
Yeah, you have to.
So
you got to.
Go ahead.
No, you just yeah, like you said, like, to have the families. That's the priority. So your motivations change, and then sometimes, like, when you're tired, is you have no choice, man. If you got to put food on the table, you have to push.
Yeah.
But most college athletes aren't in that situation, and y'all got to keep your sanity. Yeah. So I got some kids who the school really gets to them, and training at the same frequency and playing their sport, like it just is a recipe for disaster. So we got to sacrifice in some areas, and sometimes that's from the training. Sometimes it's from the social life, which I don't recommend athletes totally like throw out the window, just because you have to have some semblance of normalcy, and having friends is really important and seeing them. But yeah, it's backing off doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you a less of an athlete, less of an individual. It just makes you human, which we all are. At least I think so.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love
hope
that.
so.
So, me too. So one of the things, so just to kind of end it off here, if you want to, where can people find you on social media? Where can people reach out to you if they want, to come to you, maybe a future client? If you want them to, where can they find you?
So I'm heavily on Instagram. Like that's where I do most of my social media. Yeah, you guys can find me on Instagram. You can DM me. I offer a free consultation. So, it's a Zoom call. We just chit chat. It's not for me to make a sale. If I hear something that I can help you with, I'll definitely offer. But it's not mandatory. I don't like making people feel like they're forced to. But at the same time, I have a skill set, and I've been working with athletes for a long time, and it seems to be working. So if you're looking to get, more explosive or whatever athletic goal you have is, this may work out. And if you want to ask some questions personally, by all means, I'm open to it. So we can do that via Zoom, the free consultation call. You can DM me, you can whatever, reach out to me. I'm open for questions. And yeah, man, I have a small studio in the West Island. We're located in Beaconsfield. So if you want to drop in, check me out, by all means. It's cool. Just let me know. It's a small studio, so we can't have like a million people there.
Yep.
But yeah, man, I'm here to help if somebody wants some help, and feel free to ask questions. I'm not going to bite you. I'm not going to ask you to pay for me to ask a question.
Awesome. Well, I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to come on. I always try to have people that I feel like really, kind of have that passion. I don't know if you ever read this book by Tim Grover called Relentlessness, but I try to find they kind of categorize these people as like there's like 3 different categories, and I try to find like the cleaners, which are the people that I think which he says are the people that really know their stuff day in, day out. And so for me, I've been following you on Instagram for a while, so I thought that would be kind of cool to have you on and share your business and your knowledge with some more people. So I really appreciate you taking your time to come out and check us out.
Most definitely. Cleaner is a good title, man. My wife thinks I'm OCD when it comes to cleaning. So I think, even if I don't know everything, I can clean, man. Mr. Clean, we got to be careful. I'm coming for your job.
Absolutely. But thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. If you want, I can let you know when this is out, and you can share it if you want. But I really appreciate
100%, man. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for considering me. Again, it's quite humbling. So it's nice.
No
So
problem.
I just hope that this actually helps some people out there.
Me as well. I think it will. So
Fantastic, man.
all right. Well,
good luck with all your stuff, dude, and your new endeavors there with goalkeeping, and just kill it.
Thank you.
Do what you got to do. But again, don't be afraid to take a break.
Definitely. Sometimes I got to remember that. But thank you, and good luck with you as well. Hopefully, it's cool, to keep continuing with your business and all that stuff. So,
yeah, man, we'll be in touch, man. Don't be afraid to shoot me a DM once in a while.
For sure. All
All
right,
right, brother. All right, man. Thank you for the time, buddy.
Bye.
Ciao.